and see if it is sitting at the right height that you require. So what we've done is we've cut out a good piece of board, solid board, cut a spreader plate that's going to sit inside the tunnel bottom. What you can do is you can possibly just put a little bit of Sikaflex or something on that when you finally come to put it in to the position that it's required in, but just at this stage I'm going to put that up there, and we're also going to put a thick piece of board to take the weight in between. So we've lifted it off the back end, we've took out the box. We're going to come to the front end, we're going to use the same spreader plate. We're right to as close to the front end as you can. We're going to jack that up.
Well, there's it?
Yeah. It is. Yeah.
Now these lads have gone on really well now with this car. They've got it with the wheels on the ground now, and provisionally at the guess that we've made, it's not looking bad. In actual fact, the front is a little bit too low and the back is a little bit too high. Now we're definitely not going to do anything with the back at all, because by the time we finish this car off, put everything on it, put the fuel tank in, fill it up with fuel, probably put a miniature snap-on toolkit in the back. I think the back will be about right, and that'll sit at the right level. So we'll leave the back as it is. We come to look at the front, and we've definitely got the front a little bit low. It's never going to sit any higher unless we do something with it. It will only get lower. So all that will happen is we'll get the lads now to wind the nuts up on the front coilovers to bring the front high. You'll see that they've made a spanner just from flat strip. That's a pretty basic spanner from flat strip. They've made that to wind the suspension up. So they'll lift that up at the front. But we're looking at the wheel, and at least this wheel here, there's too much positive camber, which means the top of the wheel is leaning out. In any event, the wheel should, rather than be erect, it should lean in to give you negative camber. So we'll simply do that by just putting the spirit level against the wheel. To be precise, you would need to take two small 18mm nuts to the spirit level, so that the spirit level actually goes onto the wheel and not the tyre, because the tyre is fatter at the bottom than what it is at the top. But for this exercise, we just put it on the tyre, and we can see that the front, the top of the wheel needs to go in. So all that happens, we just undo the top ball joint, and we just screw the ball joint in. When we look at the thread, when we get closer up later on, you'll see that there is visually too much thread sticking out at the top. So we'll wind that in so that we've got the top of the wheel approximately 3/8 of an inch further in than the bottom. We're doing that with a simple spirit level. That's as good as any camber gauge. We can see, looking at the back wheels, that they look virtually perfect. if you've got a discrepancy with the camber on the back wheels, then it would be a little bit of a bigger job to sort out, but it's perfect. These lads have made a good job of lining everything up, so that's okay. So now, before we move any further, all we'll do is lift the front suspension up a little bit and just move the top ball joint in a little bit to get it correct. So the lads will do that now, and then we'll go on to the next phase in a minute, which is offering up the prop shaft, or fitting the prop shaft, and then looking at the exhaust manifold, looking at the steering shaft, and obviously looking at the alternator that always seems to be the way that all that happens. So the lads now, I've given them some instruction, they'll crash on with that, and we'll start to get this car looking, we'll start to get this project looking more like a car than a project.
Alright, so we're coming to this wheel here, and as was said earlier, we want a negative camber on the wheel. And as you can see, we've got rather a lot of thread here showing. So what you'll need to do is you take your socket, and you should have a 12mm bolt through there, sorry, set screw through there. Just loosen that off a little bit. And that will free up your bracket there. Just take your soft mallet, just tap that. So then we're going to have to loosen off the locking nut.
We've got about 13mm sticking out on the other side.
Between your nut and
then
there. And then you just wind in the top ball joint.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Wind into where it is.
Yeah. That's it.
So we see before that's going to be a good setting. So you can use your soft mallet again.
That's all the way down.
Once that's down, just pinch up your nut again. So, and obviously we've jacked up the car at the front end before we started doing that, and when you do jack the car up, remember you've got to use a rather large spreader piece of wood, so obviously you don't want to dent the underside of your vehicle, and then you can drop that back down.
So once we've loaded it down, we'll see if the wheel has moved in. And we can see that the wheel is just sloping in towards the car, which gives us negative camber.
That's giving you your negative camber. Now, as we're already here, I'll just try and explain something else to you. That you're going to measure in again from your centre of your steering rack there to your threads here, and you're going to even that up on both sides. And you might find that your face of your wheel should be running parallel on both sides with the side of your car. If you take something going to be long. You can see that your wheel wants to be running parallel with this side of your car here. That will make sure that both your wheels are running parallel and straight. So you may find that once you've tried straight edge along your car that you may have to move the front of your wheel either in or out, making sure that your steering rack is in the centre. You've got the same amount of thread sticking out from your centre of your rack, and if your wheel isn't parallel, which this one happens to be, then you'll have to loosen off your nut, push out your track rod end, and either move it in or out of your threads until your wheel sits nice and parallel with your car on both sides. And that is it. Once you're happy that you've got everything in position and your wheel's got your negative camber and it's all straight, then you can tighten up your lock nuts, and that will set your car up for you.
Right, as we said earlier, our car at the front is too low, so we're going to wind up our shockers until it's the right height. So what we're going to do is get the spanner. After you've loosened the locking nut, which is the smaller nut, we're going to tighten up the bigger nut till it's the correct height.
Michael's going to keep tightening that nut up, and as you can see we've probably started with an inch of thread showing there at the bottom, and that gave us around about 5-inch clearance off the ground at the front. So we're going to keep winding that up until we're happy that we've got the correct ride height, and then once you're happy with your ride height, you're going to wind up your locking nut and pinch that up, and we'll repeat that process on both sides until everything's looking how we want it to be.
Right, we've now wound up the springs to where we think they might be sufficient. So we'll measure the front of the car, and we can see that that's gone up 1.25 inches, and that takes it up to 6 1/8 inches. So we think that's an appropriate ride height. So we'll now wind up the locking nut on the suspension. We'll wind them up both sides to the same measurement. So we'll now lock off these nuts to keep it in that position.
If you just hold the spring, you should be able to pinch that up. That's it.
And that's locked in position. If we just do the same on the other side, that'll keep it and maintain it at that ride height.
Now move on to the next job, which is going to be to fitting of the alternator. So what you're going to require for the Pinto and our exhaust is the original boss that you removed from the engine, the original spindle. You see all that on there? Your 2 adjuster brackets, which are going to fit on here on your boss. This is to move the alternator, and you're also going to have a packing tube. This is going to go between the 2 plates like that. So obviously you're going to want your belt as well. So now you take the boss and fit it back on to the engine.
Got 917 on that.
And 17. Now we've fitted the alternator boss back onto the engine, we come to the 2 brackets, and as you can see they've got offset hole and also the plate, we've actually put a kink in, and a kink the opposite way on that side. So also this bracket has got a cutout, and this is to allow it to go into the cutout that corresponds on the boss. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that one first, put the bolt through, put that through, take the lower offset hole that's closest to the edge, put that on that side, just tweak that out. The reason the plates are offset is to set the plates to the gap that you had on your alternator, just to allow it to sit inside your alternator there. And you're also going to need the tube that goes through the centre. So as you can see, we were really struggling with that in the engine bay, so Michael's come up with a better idea that we're actually going to remove the boss. And as you can see, we put the tube in here, we line that up with the holes. Now when you come to if you're going to do this and remove it as we have done, you really need to make sure that the bracket with the cutout is going to be on the right side, which is going to be towards the back of your alternator. That should now slot in there. Again, it's going to be a tight fit, so push it in, line all your holes up, you should be able to put your bolt straight through, and that can go back onto your engine. So now we've got that, we can put it back into the engine bay. So what I was talking about earlier is, as you can see, the spindles here will line up perfectly in line. One obvious,
we've got to put the belt on now,
yeah, we've got to put the belt on now. But one obvious way that you can tell that it's going to line up is that obviously it'll line up with this adjuster bracket here. So we're going to feed the belt on. Yeah. So you can take it off the nut bolt that you took out of your adjuster, just put that back on. Again, this is all this bracketry and everything is made for the Pinto engine. So if you're going to use a different engine, you'll obviously have to fashion some sort of bracketry up, or use a different bracket. So at this time, we're just going to leave all that nice and free. Don't tighten it up too much yet. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to try in the exhaust manifold.
Right, we're now going to try and put the manifold in. I'm going to thread it through the hole, nice and gently. The last stage, me just want someone to help you. Just push the engine over a little bit if you need to. Just rock it slightly, and that's on. Now I want a couple of nuts on. So if you find that you come to put these nuts on and your threads don't go on or it's too hard, you might need some oil on. And I've been reminded that one obvious way you can just get a little bit of oil quickly if you haven't got a nice can of oil is just take out your dipstick
and just pass a little bit of oil off your dipstick onto your thread.
Just take out that. Right, now that we've got the manifold in position and the alternator in position but loose, we're now going to lay in the steering shaft.
This is the steering shaft specially designed for the Pinto engine manifold. So you might get a different steering shaft to this, depending on what engine you're going to put into your vehicle.
So we're now going to lay that in through the tube of the manifold.
As you can see, it's going to come between these two manifold tubes. You've got a short universal joint here with a thread on that should fit your steering rack, and you've got
The triangular one.
triangular shape which will fit your steering boss at the other end. Now when you run that down there, through your hole at the bottom there.
We're not going to fit it in position at the minute, just roughly lie it where it's going to go so that we can get all the alternator to miss it when we do tighten it up.
Now just make sure it's roughly going to align with your thread, and also your hole that you've got pre-cut here in your foot pedal. Once you've assessed that it's going to miss everything, you can then take that alternator and making sure that you're missing both your manifold and your steering rack, and you can tighten up your 3 bolts here, here and down here. And when you do this job, you need to juggle about your alternator and also make sure that you're pulling up your belt so it's going to be tight, nice and tight.
Right then, now that we've got the manifold in position and the alternator in the correct position, tightened up, the belt's tightened up, all the wheels are in line at the front, we're now going to fix the steering shaft. We've taken it back out the hole, and this is the nut and bolt that will bolt it to the steering rack. And it'll also slide onto the splines that are inside there. The bolt will go through and locate it on the groove which is on the steering rack. So we'll now start to put it in, slide it through there, underneath the alternator. Pull the locator on the splines of the steering rack.
So as you can see, just in here, I'm going to slip the steering shaft onto the splines that's on there. Now as you're doing this, it's a good idea to keep your holes horizontal, because this will make it easier to put your nut and bolt in. So Michael's just going to tap that on. To me, mate. Is it?
Right up, so you can see that notch.
Now go on, keep going. Right, we're in, mate. We're in. That's it. That's on. So that's right up to the very end there of the splines. So you can put your bolt through. I hope. Now let's take it back a little bit. Now on your steering rack, there's two sets of splines, and in between there's a little divot, and that's where your bolt's going to pass, so you'll have to keep just knocking it around until you wind it. Can be a little bit fiddly. Right, nearly in there, mate. There you go, that's gone right in. And at this time, now you know it's in, because you can't pull it, either push it any further in or pull it out, and I can put my nut on.
Now got the steering shaft in, it's bolted up nice and tight at the bottom, and all we're going to do is just leave it where it is until we come later to fit the steering column.
Next job we're going to come to is fitting of the prop shaft, which is here. Remember we sprayed that black earlier. And you've got, you notice at one end obviously some splines on your gearbox, and they're going to correspond with the splines in your prop shaft. So you take the spline end, feed that in, there. Just wiggle it around, tap it. Shouldn't be too hard to get in. Just feed that in. What you need to do is, you've only got 4 holes at your end here, so put that on, and it's got like a little seat that it sits on, and I can see that all four of the holes that was in the diff line up with my holes. If they don't line up, what you have to do is just either push your car slightly back or pull it forward, and that will rotate the diff until your holes line up. Once they line up, you take 4 set screws that came out of the diff originally. Don't lose these screws, because they are a specialised thread. They're the 1mm pitch thread, which is 10mm bolt, and then you can put those in. Again, you can just rock your car forward or backwards depending to line your hole up. What we've done is we've got 2 bolts in at the moment. Got one in position pinched up, what you can do then is just push your car back, make sure it's not geared, roll it back, so you'll have that in neutral. Carry on until you've got all 4 of your set screws in.
These lads are now getting on great with this car, and I'm here to help them get it finished now. We've got a deadline to meet, and I'm here to speed them on a little bit, get them to drink not so quite so many cups of coffee, and to finish it. The last jobs that I've done was the rear suspension, and we talked about adjusting the front suspension, and they've screwed the top ball joints further in, wound the springs up, and the ride height looks about right. Now, having said that, the universal springs and shock absorbers that we give you from the front, they're for various applications, and we may find that the Pinto engine they've used here, the 2-litre Pinto engine, is probably about the heaviest engine that is going to fit in one of these cars, with it being all cast iron. And you may find that if you wanted to use the car over pretty rough roads, you might find the suspension a little bit too low down. Now, in order to give you a little bit more height, you can alter the holes in the wishbone. So you see this bottom wishbone, this is for another car that's being built. I brought these in to show you. And if you want to get a little bit more height, then those two fixing holes for the shock absorber, you can bring them further out towards the centre of the car. So all you would do is take away that area just there, cut that away,